Hi, welcome to this week's Monday Mercy video from Jubilee Plus. I hope you had a chance to catch up with Martin's video last week where he talked about the year of Jubilee and explained why when he founded this charity he called it Jubilee Plus. And in this week's Monday Mercy video I want to continue that theme a little bit by looking at the Old Testament again, just as Martin did, and looking at the law of Moses. Because I just love the fact that even in the midst of some of these passages of the Bible that can be difficult for us to understand, difficult for us to understand even why they've made it into the Bible, there is so much that is beautiful and powerful and wonderful in the Old Testament law that God gave to Moses. There's so much in it actually that reveals to us something of his heart for those in poverty, those who are oppressed, those who are vulnerable or marginalised in any way. So we see in the law of Moses God's heart for people and his call on God's people. He's like, this is how I want you to live. This is how your society will flourish. And some of the provisions he gives for people in poverty, some of the protections as well, are things like the law of gleaning. So gleaning is where the farmers would go and they would pick up all their crops and bring them in to the storehouses, and obviously there would be a temptation to make sure every last bit was picked up, because either they're providing for their families or they're going to sell it and that's how they're going to support their extended family. So there might be a temptation to go and make sure not a single grain is lost. But God says don't do that. God says whatever falls by the wayside as you glean, as you gather your crops, God says leave it for the widow, the orphan, the foreigner, those in poverty. Basically, a list of people who had no way to support themselves. God says leave it so that they can have food. There's things like in the law it says that wages should be paid on time. I don't know if you've ever submitted an invoice for anything and felt like the other person just takes as long as possible to pay it. I've been in that situation with a couple of companies where you're waiting for payment and the time just ticks along and you feel like they're just eking it out as long as they can. And for reasons that I understand, but actually what God says is pay wages on time. Make sure you get money. When they've done the work, make sure you get their wages to them on time. The law also said that no profit should be made on food. Isn't that an interesting one? Another one I find pretty interesting is that God said to his people, when you lend, don't charge interest. Now, in our society, we know that literally thousands of people have been affected by exorbitant interest rates. We know that actually debt, overwhelming debt in the UK is one of the leading causes of suicide and one of the leading causes of marriage breakdown. But actually what God says is don't charge interest on loans. Like just lend and get back what you lent. He also says that tithes, so money that was given to support the priests, the kind of ministers of God, if you like, that tithes weren't just for the priests, but they were also for those in poverty. They were to help support those in poverty. That's interesting, isn't it? And in Deuteronomy 15, we read about the Sabbath year, where God basically says to his people, every seventh year, I want you to cancel every debt. Every debt gets cancelled every seventh year. Now imagine if we had a system like that in place. No one would need to contemplate suicide. Families wouldn't need to break down over debt. There wouldn't be hopelessness associated with debt, because no debt would be forever. You would know that the Sabbath year, the seventh year was coming, and you'd get a chance to start over, to start afresh again. And Martin talked about the year of Jubilee, where God says you're to go even further. In the year of Jubilee, it's not just that debts are to be cancelled, but if anyone has had to put themselves into slavery, this isn't like modern slavery. This was like you would have put yourself into slavery to support your family and your household. And God says if anyone's put themselves into slavery in the year of Jubilee, they get freed. But not only that, if they've had to give up land that might have been in their family for generations, they get it back. So the whole economic system is actually founded on grace. It limited the gap between the rich and the poor. It modified the extremes of wealth and poverty, because actually the richest couldn't go on getting richer and richer and richer at the expense of the poorest, but also the poorest were never ever in a hopeless situation. I think it's so wonderful, it's so beautiful, and God says this is how I want you to live. And it actually, he doesn't just say your debts will be cancelled, you'll be freed, your land will be given back. He actually says in Deuteronomy 15, when you release the person who's put themselves into slavery, don't send them away empty-handed, but supply them liberally from your flock, your threshing floor and your winepress. So what's happening here is that God is basically saying, don't just send them away and kind of pat them on the back and say, off you go, I hope life works out better for you this time around, or maybe if you try harder this time you'll be okay. No, God is saying, equip them with everything they need to get back on their feet. Give them all they need from your supply liberally. I just love it. I love that the fact liberally is in there. God says supply them with all they need. And as Christians, we can still do this. We can look out for those who've got less than we've got. And we can supply them liberally from what we've got to empower them to support themselves and be lifted out of poverty.